Well, good morning, and thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be in front of this incredible room of individuals. My name is Susie Eckelman. I'm a 2019 MBA candidate here at the Georgetown McDonough School of Business, the co-president of the Net Impact chapter here at Georgetown, and also honored to be a Georgetown Social Enterprise Initiative student leader. The Social Enterprise Initiative is bringing together incredible organizations across policy, nonprofits, business, and society to solve our most pressing challenges. And by bringing together the individuals in this room, corporate partners, students, we're creating research, actionable insights, and first-class education to solve these challenges. At the forefront of the Georgetown Social Enterprise Initiative is our next speaker, our incredible founder, Bill Novelli.
Well, Susie, thank you so much. I hope the students have arrived because you are the change agents of tomorrow. And thank you, Susie, and good morning, everybody. Our Global Social Enterprise Initiative is very, very proud to host this National Movements Forum today. And we are very proud of our Executive Director, Leslie Crutchfield, and her new book, How Change Happens. Leslie, wave your hand so people can see you. We all know that these are difficult and yet exciting times in our nation's history. Change is in the air. We all want it to be positive, sustainable social change that creates a better, stronger country for ourselves and for future generations. But none of that is guaranteed. Leslie's given us an important book, and it comes at an important time. There's no real recipe for social change. There's no movement in a box that we can use to create a more equitable, just society. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us. But she has studied a number of organizations and change makers, and Leslie has given us conclusions that we can apply if we have the courage and the ability to take up a cause that's worth fighting for. In other words, we can make change happen. There are many change makers here today. And like you, I've also been involved in social challenges, including health promotion and disease prevention at Porto Novelli, working for women's empowerment and education at CARE, fighting the tobacco wars at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, promoting age-related issues at AARP, and reforming advanced illness and end-of-life care at the Coalition to Reform Advanced Care. And I guess we've all got the scars to prove it. And Leslie's insights strike me as being right on target. She shows us how networks and coalitions are critical to success. No single organization is big or wealthy enough to tackle huge social and environmental problems alone. She tells us that we have to change both hearts and policy. That is, we need to achieve policy reform as well as shift social norms and individual behaviors. And as she points out, corporations are much more engaged today, from speaking out on public issues, involving their employees, appealing to their customers to make a positive difference for them and for society. Leslie's emphasis on leadership is critical. Leaders make the difference in social movements. Her finding and our lesson is that good leaders exist throughout a movement. You don't have to be the woman or the man at the top to be a leader. And most movements have multiple leaders, being leaderful, as Leslie calls it. And I want to add an additional thought to the mix. Virtually no societal change, positive or otherwise, is permanent. Reversals happen. New generations grow up, lessons are forgotten, program funds are diverted, and technologies emerge. Look at tobacco. For as much progress as we've made here, the industry is pillaging across the world, advertising to women and kids, sampling, sponsoring music festivals, all the tactics they used to employ in the U.S. And they're working on new products that they promise will reduce harm while providing the nicotine and the flavor that smokers crave. Does that sound familiar? No, you can never drop your guard. I'm really looking forward to today's discussions. We all know that there's no silver bullet for change. We have to do it ourselves. And Leslie's book and your experiences show us the way. And now let me introduce my friend and colleague, Leslie Crutchfield.
Thank you, Bill, for that amazing introduction. I have to say I am just so proud to be able to call you a colleague and a friend. And I'm so delighted to see so many old friends and new friends here in the room today to be part of this launch event for the Global Social Enterprise Initiative's book, and also to just talk about how change happens. Bill and I and our team of about 20 colleagues here at the McDonough School of Business in GSEI have spent the last several years studying some of the most remarkable social changes to have happened in our lifetimes, in the last generation. We've learned so much about the practices and the tactics of real change makers. The leaders in the room, some of the leaders in the room you'll hear from during our panel discussions later this morning and over lunch. But some of you might be asking yourself, come on in and have a seat. I see people in the back. Some of you might be asking yourself, why are we here in Hariri, in the business school of Georgetown? You know, isn't social change more the purview of McCourt, our policy school, or maybe the law school down on Capitol Hill? Well, of course, you got to change policies. You have to reform laws to make change happen. But that's not how change happens. People are how change happens, as Bill said. At the end of the day, change making is an act of leadership. And leadership involves strategy. You got to make tough choices, especially when you have limited resources, as most activist groups have. When the going gets tough, you've got to mitigate risk. And when things get really hard, you got to innovate. You need to be entrepreneurial. Adapt as your opponents adapt, as Bill talked about the ever-changing tobacco industry. Leadership, strategy, management, innovation, entrepreneurships, these are the hallmarks of a great business education. And I can think of no other business school in the world than McDonough as the best place to be talking about how change happens, because we are rooted in these Jesuit values. You know, our mission here at the business school is to educate leaders in service not just to business, but also society. And our hope here is that every student that graduates from Georgetown will always remember, no matter what sector they go work in, that there's more than one bottom line. Now today we're going to talk about movements. In the headlines today, you know, you've got Never Again, the students coming out of Parkland, bringing a fresh wave of activism for tighter gun measures. We've got the Me Too movement peaking. We see teachers in Oklahoma and West Virginia rising up. In the same time, we see members of the NRA, proponents of Second Amendment freedoms, and all movements from all sides of the political aisle rising up, speaking out, exercising their First Amendment rights. I can't think of a time in recent history where movements have mattered as much as they do now. So it's a really important time. And the question we asked ourselves to do the research for this book was, why do some movements succeed while others don't? And this is what drove our research. We looked at some of the most significant social and environmental changes to have happened in the last few decades. Let's take smoking. Bill talked about. How do we go from a time when smoking was frequent, it was fashionable, you know, just a couple decades ago, even in this room, every third one of you could have been holding a cigarette. Doctors and nurses smoked on the job. How do we go from this, in a generation, to a time today when smoking is banned in most public places in the United States? Joe Camel, the Marlboro Man have pretty much disappeared from marketing. But what's more important is that smoking is not only out of practice, it's out of fashion. These were the deliberate actions of the change makers like Bill, his colleagues from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Truth, and others that paved the way for these reforms. Another issue we looked at was marriage equality. How did we go from a time just 15 years ago when 17 states had ballot referendums under the way to ban same-sex marriage? You had a powerful conservative and religious movement led by leaders like Mitt Romney out of Massachusetts, fighting and winning to define marriage as only between a man and a woman. And how did we get to today, where now it's the law of the land? I will tell you, even though the Will and Grace effect gets a lot of credit, that's not how change happens. Guns are another issue that we looked at in very much detail in our research. How did the NRA transform from this? More than 130 years, it was a 501c3 charitable organization founded to teach marksmanship. Today, the NRA looks and is very different. We know it as a very powerful lobbying, electoral, and grassroots advocacy force that has dramatically expanded gun rights access and ownership rights, so that today, just like cigarettes a couple years ago, guns are everywhere, openly carried in the majority of US states, assault weapons freely stockpiled by civilians. How did we get to this place? These dramatic changes in just a decade. So in our research, we looked at a range of issues, and on the left side of your screen, we looked at changes that have happened since the 1980s, including the ones I just talked about, but also drunk driving reduction. Crashes from drunk driving deaths have been cut in half since Mothers Against Drunk Driving was created in 1980. We've also seen negative changes, the rise in mass incarceration. And positive, we've eliminated polio in 99.9% of the world. And we also looked in our research at changes that are in progress, changes that haven't happened. Why is it that the gun rights movement has historically been so successful and gun safety advocates have struggled to keep up until recently? Education equity, gun safety. On our lunch panel today, we'll talk about the obesity epidemic. Why despite the best efforts of public health and advocates and even businesses to reformulate their products, is obesity on the rise in this country and, of course, around the world? So we looked at all of these issues from a comparative perspective. And these practices are the 6 factors that emerged as the real reasons that explain why successful movements succeed and the less successful movements struggle. And we're going to talk about each of these 6 ideas this morning, and then we're going to go in depth in the panels later today on how they're applied. Let's talk about the first practice, turn grassroots gold. This is the first chapter in the book because it's the most important reason why winning movements triumph. When you look at the work, for instance, let's take the NRA. The NRA has nearly 5 million members that they talk about in their membership rolls. Historically, the leading gun control group for really several decades in the US was Brady Campaign. And the NRA far outweighed with its 5 million members. Brady at its height has had around 400 or 500 million members. Many of those galvanized when Donna Dees, one of our speakers this afternoon, who created the Million Mom March and led more than 1 million people demonstrating in the last major demonstration for gun control on Mother's Day of 2000, bringing hundreds of thousands here to the Capitol and hundreds of thousands more in satellite marches to build up the Brady's grassroots chapters. But it was no match for the NRA, 1/10 the size of the NRA. Now that started to change in recent years. Everytown for Gun Safety came online in 2014 in the wake of the Sandy Hook school shooting, when Shannon Watts, the founder of Moms Demand Action, started a Facebook page. She was looking for a movement to join. She couldn't find one, so she started one. Merged up with Mayor Bloomberg's Mayors Against Illegal Gun. Today, Everytown has more than 5 million supporters. And I dare say, after Parkland and with the students that are leading the Never Again movement, Enough is Enough, they're well on their way to tipping past 5 million. For the first time in modern US history, gun control is providing an actual counterweight to the NRA in terms of grassroots, local, and state-based action. It might not look that way in the media because the media always gives a lot of press to both sides. But when you dig down in the details, as we've done for the last 3 years, we've gone up to NRA headquarters in Fairfax. We've spoken with leaders from all of the major gun control groups. And this is what we found. And it's consistent across all the causes that we studied. When you look at tobacco, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, which Bill was the founding president of, Truth Initiative, Americans for Non-Smokers' Rights had huge grassroots support. Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, by the way, is not just a single organization. It's a coalition. American Heart, American Lung, Cancer Society, and the millions of members that make up the grassroots base of those initiatives. So even though you had a very powerful tobacco industry, by the way, the tobacco industry dwarfs the gun industry in revenues. They had political support. They paid all the advertising firms. They hired all the PR firms, the lawyers. And yet the activists on the tobacco control side were able to undercut tobacco significantly in this country. It's a great story of David versus Goliath. We just know it takes thousands of Davids at the grassroots level to win. Even polio. This was a global issue that we looked at. When you ask the average person, who's made the biggest difference to eliminating polio around the world, you might say Bill Gates, right? He's poured billions into this issue through their global health. But Gates will tell you that they don't go to any meeting with any leader in any country of the world to talk about polio without a Rotarian. It's the Rotary Club and their millions of members through their 33,000 chapters in every country on earth that provided the social and political will to make polio hopefully a thing of the past. The second practice in our book is called Sharpen Your 10-10-10-20 equals 50 vision. That's a tongue twister. I'm going to blame the founders of Freedom to Marry because it comes straight out of the playbook of the plan to win marriage equality in this country. But it's a great plan because it clearly focuses on each of the 50 states and the need to change laws, policies, and social norms at the grassroots state level before you go for any big federal change. There's a lot of talk today. We see in the headlines all of these activists exercising their First Amendment rights. On Friday this week, students across the country are going to walk out of schools in memorial of the Columbine anniversary. That's their First Amendment right to do that. And we see a lot about the Second Amendment these days as proponents of Second Amendment freedoms want to defend and expand those rights. But it's the 10th Amendment to the US Constitution which actually governs how change happens in this country. The 10th Amendment pushes most power out to the states and the people and reserves very limited powers to the federal government. So if you're a change maker and you want to make change, it's really the 10th Amendment doctrine that you want to follow. Let's look at how some of them did it with winning marriage equality. I want to tell you a story that starts in 2005, 13 years ago. Some of the leaders of the marriage equality movement were gathered in a conference room, probably something like this, up in Jersey City. Evan Wolfson was there, Mary Bonato, a number of other leaders. And the marriage equality movement was on the ropes. We had DOMA. Clinton had signed a law defining marriages between a man and a woman. 17 states had marriage bans, either on the books or on the way. California had just repealed its law to allow same-sex couples to marry. One state, Massachusetts, had actually allowed gay marriage, but there was this massive backlash led by Romney, the Catholic Church, and others. It was not a good moment. At that moment, same-sex marriage did not look inevitable. It looked impossible. So these leaders gathered in this room and they said, what are we going to do? Tim Gill, a mega donor, had convened them and said, we got to regroup here. And it was at that meeting that this 10-10-10-20 vision emerged. They asked themselves, okay, if we can't get far at a national level, what can we do? What if we took 10 states and we said, let's go for full marriage. Let's take Massachusetts and maybe New York where we have a shot. Let's take 10 states and just try and go for civil unions. It's separate but equal, but at least it's better than what we have. We'll take 10 states and we'll try and get just domestic partnerships. And then the balance of the US states, let's just try and remove some of the discriminatory laws that are on the books that have made life so difficult for members of the LGBT community. They took each state where it was at and made a commitment to advance it one step forward, so that by the time the Supreme Court in 2015 was deciding the landmark case that made marriage equality the law of the land, there was a groundswell of support across enough states that they couldn't go back. It was a very savvy strategy. Now, other movements have used the exact same approach. They just might not call it the 10-10-10-20 plan. You know, when drunk driving reduction got off the ground with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Candy Lightner started that in California. She moved the headquarters of MAD to Texas, but said, we'll never open a national office. It's all about the chapters at the state level and empowering local advocates, the victims and survivors, the family members with the lived experience of that problem, letting them lead these movements. You saw it in tobacco control. You know, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation poured $700 million in the tobacco wars over 10 years. The biggest chunk of that money actually didn't go to the campaign for the tobacco-free kids. It went to the Smokeless States initiatives, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into state-based coalitions to get excise taxes and those policy changes that helped change how we think about smoking today. Other causes, certainly gun rights, advocating for open carry. The state preemption strategy of NRA is one of the big reasons why we have the policy environment we have today that's so lenient around guns. Okay, let's talk about this next practice. This is one of Bill and I's favorite practices in the book because it's all about how effective change makers focus on changing hearts, not just policy. You really have to do both if you want to win, especially in today's environment. And I can think of no other movement that we studied that has mastered the art of social marketing and change making than the tobacco control movement. When we talk about why nobody in this room is smoking here today, it's not just because there's a policy against it, it's because tobacco control made it unfashionable, not just unwelcomed. How did we get smoking rates down to 15% for adults and 6% for youth? Well, a lot of credit for the youth smoking rate being close to zero goes to Truth Initiative, a campaign that came out of the settlement from the tobacco settlement with the tobacco companies in 1996. Now, they didn't just employ Madison Avenue-style advertising or even traditional PSAs that say don't smoke. The reason anti-smoking advocates have been so effective is because they've done this. Let's look at one of their most popular viral videos. Okay, now when my 11-year-old son and I first saw this video, we had to watch it like 10 times in a row. It is addictive. You could see why it went viral. It also doesn't really say don't smoke. It doesn't say smoking kills you. It doesn't say smoking's bad for you if you're a young person. What does it say? It says smoking kills your pets. What do kids care about? Pets, not what their parents think is good or bad for them. Truth leaders did a lot of research into the psychographics of millennials, next stage millennials, and Robin's going to talk more about this on our panel in the afternoon. You know, young people today care a lot about social justice issues. They care about things like their pets. So the messages that were crafted to try and convince them to never pick up a cigarette focus on what young people really care about today. And we're going to go into that a little more on our panel later this morning. Now, Truth Initiative advocates were very savvy with their use of social media. But as you know, these tools, advertising, social media, are available to your opponents, to all sides of an issue. Another movement that's been widely successful at using social media is the NRA. They have NRA TV, they have commercial channels, they are all over YouTube. In fact, when I was searching for that Cat Mageddon video a couple years ago for the research for my book, after we finished watching it the 10th time. I, just out of curiosity, typed in gun control to see what videos would pop up in my feed around gun control, and this is what I got.
We're millions of average, honest Americans. We're moms and dads who want to live in safe neighborhoods and send our kids to safe schools. We're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and none of the above. We're every color, creed, faith, and occupation. We're American from every walk of life. But we're united in our belief in the Second Amendment that keeps our families safe and our country free.
The NRA is fighting for vendors like myself, making sure we have a place of employment, places to employ other people, fighting for the rights of individuals to enjoy the freedoms that our forefathers enjoyed and that hopefully my kids will enjoy later on.
It's a little hard sometimes for a father and son to just get out and just hang out together. I want him to understand guns aren't what you see on TV.
I got grandkids. The country I grew up in is gone, and I want it back.
In all of freedom's history, there has never been an organization quite like the National Rifle Association of America. No other people are so alert, so vigilant, so unafraid to take a stand and go out and fight for what's good and right. We, the people of the National Rifle Association, represent the very best of America's strength and of America's character.
Do you want to know why the NRA has been so successful? Because what they're selling is freedom. They figured out what connects with a fundamental American value and exploited that to the full extent. And by the way, all winning movements do the same thing. With the marriage equality movement, the message was love. How do you shift from rights and why LGBT members are being discriminated against and left out to why they want to get married, because they're loved. Evan's going to talk about that later this morning. With the campaign for tobacco-free kids and the tobacco control movement, it was about truth. It was about exposing and showing the reality. For drunk driving, for years, we'd showed ads saying why drunk driving can kill people. But it wasn't until Mothers Against Drunk Driving helped people understand that friends shouldn't let friends drive drunk and took that viral long before the internet came, that change started to happen. Now, the gun control movement historically has not been as strong in terms of leveraging some of these advertising, social media tools to change hearts and minds. And maybe that's because for as long as it's been measured, the public opinion is much more in favor of stricter gun control measures. But after Sandy Hook, and with the advent of Sandy Hook Promise, the gun control movement has gotten much more savvy and bold about how they go about trying to change hearts and minds. I'm going to share this video from Sandy Hook Promise now.
I got some news today from the radio man. He spoke the words somber and as softly as he can. The world stood still and the sky opened up. I made my way to fill up my coffee cup. Then it occurred to me as the daylight sky shone blue, today's the day that Johnny met June. He waited a while, he knew that he would. He was gonna hang around here for as long as he could. The days went by, and hours idle passed. He was never sure just how long he would last. But there's not much love in a lonely room. Today's the day that Johnny met June.
Have a good summer.
You too.
Thanks.
Hey, you must be bored.
No way.
This is the guy that I was running to in the library.
You're kind of
yeah.
guilty. So,
Oh my God.
so you like to write on desks?
Yeah, that's what I do.
Now we're starting over, it's the place that we are. You look more pretty met June. Today's the day that Johnny met June.
If you're going to win, you have to pull heartstrings and do the other things that we write about in this book. Now, at lunch, we're going to talk about this next practice. How do we break from business as usual? We looked at the fascinating role that companies have played in advancing each of the causes, and it's often counterintuitive. We saw airline workers being the first to rise up and ban smoking. We'll talk on the panel at lunch about the role that businesses played in advancing the marriage equality cause. Across all of the causes that we studied, we looked at the business role. And we've got 4 key ways that we write about in the book of how they do it. And it's everything from being first policy movers to, at the far extreme, still being even more exposed targets of boycotts and other types of glare. Social media has made much more power, put it in the hands of consumers when a company is doing wrong things, but it's also helping companies that do the right thing get more attention. Now, the last 2 practices in the book we're not going to talk about in detail. They have to do with the interworkings of a movement. Reckon with adversarial allies has to do with how, even on the same side of an issue, there's a lot of dissent that happens about how to move forward. The winning movements figure out how to find a common agenda and advance that cause. And the last chapter in the book is Be Leaderful. And that's where we talk about the leaders that we're going to hear from in the next minute or so on the panel. How do they go find a balance between being a movement that's on one extreme, too leader-less, chaotic, there's anarchy, think Occupy Wall Street, it flares up, but then it kind of fades away. Or on the right, being too leader-led, too top-down. The winning movements push power out of the central organizations to the grassroots. So behind every national organization that you'll hear from, there are millions of grassroots members that were part of that cause. So we've talked about these 6 practices. I want to leave you with these 3 essential truths that emerged from studying all of these different movements. First, change is possible. You can see from the incredibly diverse political array of causes that have won in recent decades, it doesn't matter if you're a libertarian, a Tea Party, or a Republican, or a liberal, a progressive, a Democrat. Both sides have ample opportunity to win. It's nonpartisan. But change is deliberate. It does not happen by chance. It happens because of leaders. And by the way, not leaders anointed because they were the CEO of some company or an elected official. Leaders like you. The leaders of these movements were everyday people. Bill was a PR guy before founding Tobacco Free Kids. The leaders of MAD, she was a real estate agent, homemakers, everyday people, as well as lawyers and lobbyists. And they all had the power to make change because they stood up and did the things that we write about in the book. And just like each of them, each of you is capable of making change too. Thank you very much. Okay, so now I'm going to ask our panel for the morning to come up, and as they come up, I will introduce you. Nicole and Evan, Donna, as you make your way to the stage, once they get settled in the seats, I'll give an introduction. And as they come up, I'll refer you to your packets. In your registration packets, full bios are available for each of our panelists. I'm not going to read out those bios, but I will just share with you a high-level information. So, Nicole, why don't you sit here? Yep. And then Millie. Hi, how are you? Next to Evan. Yep. So when you write a book, you interview hundreds of people. You never get to meet them. So that's why today is so special, because many of my heroes heroes and heroines are right here on the stage and will be here at lunch too. And we get to hear directly from them how they were able to drive these movements forward. From your left to your right, I am proud to introduce our morning panelists. We have Nicole Hockley, founder and managing director of Sandy Hook Promise. Please hold your applause till I've introduced all the speakers. Then we have Milly Trevino Saucedo. She's a co-founder and vice president of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. Then we have Erica Totten, a co-creator of the Black Lives Matter movement here in the DC area. Evan Wolfson, founder of Freedom to Marry and an esteemed professor of law at Georgetown University now. And last but certainly not least, Robin Koval, the CEO of the Truth Initiative. Please join me in welcoming this amazing panel. Okay, so we've talked about some of these best practices that GSEI has learned in what drives successful movements. And we're going to start by just letting these movement leaders introduce themselves and tell us how the cause that you're involved with and how you got involved. And we're going to start on the end here with Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. As you said, my name is Nicole Hockley, and I'm one of the founders and managing directors of Sandy Hook Promise. Sandy Hook Promise was first started 2 days after the shooting at Sandy Hook School, and then I formally helped launch the organization 1 month after the shooting. The reason I became involved, my son was killed, plain and simple. Both of my children were at the school the day of the shooting. One came home and one didn't. And like a lot of people who get involved in movements, unfortunately, and especially with the gun violence prevention movement, you don't tend to get involved until it touches you personally, which is a significant problem in this movement. But sadly, more and more people are being touched by gun violence, so it is becoming an ever-growing movement of outrage and passion. Sandy Hook Promise, we'll talk some more later about why we do what we do in the way that we do it. But we started down the policy route, and I think tomorrow is the 5-year anniversary of when background checks failed in DC in 2013. And for us, that was a pivotal moment, because we thought, if that's the low-hanging fruit, we're doing something completely wrong. And we studied social change. We studied how other movements made progress. And we also studied the NRA and learned how best in practice they are as organizers, and figured out, okay, we're going to do something completely different. And that's why we teach people, as you saw with Evan, that gun violence is preventable when you know the signs, and focus that message on 2 generations to truly get that change that's required. And obviously with the Parkland students, we're seeing new breath breathed into this movement, a new energy and a new voice that I truly hope is going to help with the midterm elections, but also continue this legacy of students asking their parents and parents getting engaged in this issue. And then instead of thinking that this is hopeless and helpless, that there are things you can do in your community to make a difference and stop violence before it starts.
Thank you. Milly?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me and being part of this. Milly Trevino Saucedo, and I come from, my background is, I do come from a migrant farm worker family. I did start working when I was 8 years old, so living, and I'm one of 10 children in my family, so we were truly migrants, and at a certain age, you start understanding a little bit more of why all the issues that you and your family were going through. And as a teenager, I learned about the United Farm Workers, and it's a long story, but it has to do with how being from a part of the society of being very invisible. And and then being a woman much more, and a Latina, and then you go naming all the other layers. As we learned about, as I personally learned about our rights, and then understanding that as women we didn't talk about women's rights in the workplace. So there were many different things that had happened, but at the same time, I started finding out that later in time, as more of an adult, that many other women felt the same way, thought the same way, and had gone through worse situations than myself. And so because and I think I'll share that later on, but it had to do with a needs assessment done for a master thesis. And that opened our eyes, especially mine, in terms of the work how we were doing it, in terms of organizing or being a leader or not in the community. So we started a farmer good women's movement in California, a little bit much easier for us in California than in other states, just because the United Farm Workers had already opened the stage of organizing with farm workers. But then what ended up happening is that throughout time, we got involved with policy advocacy, not just opening the dialogue and not talking about all these myths and taboos about what you can speak or not, you can share or not, you can publicly do awareness on or not. And with time, we ended up organizing the National Alliance of Farm Worker Women, which is named Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. And there's some things that I will share in a little bit. But this kind of movement really has opened our eyes in terms of how we can also support each other from the different industries, not just 2 or 3 kind of industries about what is violence and sexual assault and harassment in the workplace.
Thank you, Millie. Erica?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So my name is Erica Totten. I'm one of the co-creators of Black Lives Matter, and specifically one of the co-creators of Black Lives Matter DC. And just thinking about answering the question of how we got involved, ultimately the way that I look at Black Lives Matter, it's been happening since 1619. So this is not anything new. And this is just the new iteration of the Black liberation movement that started when our ancestors were captured and brought as enslaved people to this country, and have always pushed for our liberation and the liberation of people around us, liberation for our children, access to education, all those things. And so thinking about now, growing up knowing that history, and I'm sure that the 6 Black people in the room also know that history too. That's what listen, when I come into spaces like this, I'm always looking because access is important. Many of these conversations are happening and the people who are actually doing the work are not even in the room. So I appreciate being invited here and also know that there are holes and gaps and we could be doing more. You all could be doing more. And so thinking about how I got involved with the Black Lives Matter movement, as a former educator, high school English teacher, I was doing the liberation work in the different environments that I was in. So as a teacher, always having that context of intersectionality when giving assignments or supporting students in processing what they were experiencing. Continued to have conversations on race with community members and the impact of systemic and institutional and also internalized racism and anti-Blackness that many Black people in this country we've internalized in order to survive. And that also has an impact on us as well. And so kind of looking at that broad spectrum. But in 2014, when I saw the murder of Michael Brown, when it was all over, actually not all over the news, it was all over social media. I, at that time, was a stay-at-home mom. So I always make this joke like I was taking my kids to soccer practice. And over time, looking at John Crawford, Renisha McBride, Eric Gardner, so many names, it was just compounding. And as I was watching the uprising, in Ferguson unfold and saw that the National Guard was being called in, and National Guard doesn't arrest people. We know what the National Guard does, particularly thinking about New Jersey. Let's say in 76, something around that, in the 70s, when this particularly happened. But I knew that I had to go. So I looked at my husband, and he already knew that I was going to be going. And I really just put out a call and said, I'm driving to Ferguson, I'm renting a car. Does anybody want to come with me? I was first researching a bus, and then, of course, connecting with people in Ferguson. And I'm glad when I got there, the way the city or the street is set up by the Quick Trip, I'm sure folks are familiar with that, it just wasn't conducive to a big, large bus. It kind of looks like Waldorf. It's not like a inner city as was depicted on in the media. So I got in the car, I was at a meeting, told some folks that I was leaving that night. If y'all want to come, pack a bag. I don't know how long I'm gonna be there, but I'm going. And so 5 strangers got into a car. And one of my guy that I met, Chuck, white passing guy, he's Egyptian, but white passing. We literally had to come up with a plan because we knew that hearing from activists that police were stopping black folks in cars that were on the way there. And so we kind of had to create a story that he was our youth minister and we were going to a conference. And so all of that to say, it was very organic. When we think about our movement, there was no one person that was impacted. We've all been impacted. And black people in this country, are, if you're honest, you usually have been waiting for the uprising to happen. And it happened in Ferguson in this time. And so it wasn't one person that started it. It wasn't 3 people. It was very organic. And I'm just one of the representations of the Black Lives Matter movement here in this city.
Thank you, Erica. We talk about leaderful movements and something that BLM aspires to. Evan.
I wrote my law school thesis back in 1983 on why gay people should have the freedom to marry and why we should fight for the freedom to marry. And the paper made these 2 major points, that marriage was both an important goal and a strategy, that by claiming the vocabulary of marriage, we as gay people would be engaging non-gay people with an engine of transformation that would help change their understanding of who gay people are, why marriage matters to us as to them, and thereby advance our ability to achieve not only the freedom to marry, something very, very important in its own right, but change their understanding of who gay people are in a way that would enable us to advance on the full range of protections and inclusion and concerns for LGBT people. I got a B on that paper, and so spent the next 32 years trying to make up for that with extracurricular activities, such as litigating the world's first ever trial on what the government's reason for denying gay people the freedom to marry was, showing there was no good reason, and winning the first ruling in the history of the world in favor of the freedom to marry, opening the door to a victory that was then snatched away out of the courts by the political process and a defeat. The same thing that happened 10 years later in Hawaii. I founded an organization called Freedom to Marry to serve as a campaign that would drive a strategy and leverage a movement in order to achieve this goal. And a mere 32 years later, succeeded in getting the Supreme Court to say yes to something it had said no to, which is what I was writing about in that paper.
Thank you. Robin.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me here. So you heard a little bit about Truth Initiative during the Leslie's wonderful talk. We are the largest, longest standing national organization dedicated to youth tobacco prevention. We were founded out of the Master Settlement Agreement back in the late 90s. And of course, a lot of people do know us from our cat videos and all the wonderful things we do in the Truth Campaign, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we also do a lot of other work that supports that. So we have at Truth Initiative a research and policy group, a scientific institute called the Schroeder Institute, because we believe that all of our work needs to be evidence-driven. You see the output of it, and it's entertaining and engaging, and of course, that's how we invite young people in. But All of that is backed by science. We also have a pretty strong community and youth engagement practice. Some of our young leaders are here today because we really believe that while we can do things at 30,000 feet and put big public education messages out there, unless we can draw those threads down onto the grassroots level and engage young people and put things into their words and in their networks, we will never be as successful as we can be. And we have an innovations group too, so we are developing digital smoking cessation practices, right? Because the only way people really want to engage to stop smoking these days is through their phones. I'm very, very proud. The statistic that I love the most about Truth Initiative is since we started the Truth Campaign, which is back in 2000, we have helped 1 million young people. We've prevented 1 million young people from smoking, 1 million young people. And today, as you heard from Leslie, that smoking rate when we first started was 23% of young people, 8th, 10th, 12th graders smoked. If you can imagine, 1/4 of more than that in this university, because they're older, would have been smokers. Today, that number is 5.4%. It'll be below 5% within a year, which is extraordinary. I got involved in this. I have a background similar to Bill. That's why I, such an inspiration for me in the tobacco control, or as I like to say, tobacco freedom movement. I was in advertising, communications, marketing for most of my career. I ran a very large advertising agency in New York, my last job before I came here. But I was always a big fan of the Truth Campaign because to me it was always an example of when communications really, really work. They don't just sell products, they actually create change in the world. And so I loved it. I'm also an ex-smoker. I was recruited to be a replacement smoker as the tobacco industry themselves have named the young people that they invite in every year to be smokers. 90% of all smokers start before the age of 19. Nobody wakes up on their 30th birthday and says, I think I'll start smoking today. Doesn't happen. So I personally had experienced that. Fortunately, I quit many, many, many years ago, but I remembered that experience of how I thought I was making a choice, but the industry was making a choice for me. And working in advertising, while I personally never worked on any tobacco business, I never would have. In fact, I turned down jobs at agencies where that was one of the things I would have been asked to do. I sort of felt a responsibility because the tobacco industry was built by the advertising industry. Joe Camel, the Marlboro Man, all those lovely pieces of advertising that Leslie showed before were products of Madison Avenue. So when I had the chance to use everything that I had been taught and had contributed and for many, many clients, I thought, wouldn't this be wonderful to use the tobacco industry's money, to use all the things that I learned and pay it forward a little bit. And so that's how I got here.
Thank you, Robin. So let's talk about this practice of changing hearts as well as policy. And the way we have this panel constructed is at the far end, I have 2 leaders of movements who have won. Now, of course, that win is not permanent. I know tobacco continues to push back against the industry globally as well as against vaping here domestically. And the freedoms of marriage equality that have been won, Evan, don't necessarily extend to other justice and equity campaigns that the LGBT community is working on. But let's start on this end, and let's talk about changing hearts and minds. We're going to start with Robin, and then Evan. Then we're going to come to these emerging movements, Black Lives Matter, Women and Farm Worker Union, Nicole with Sandy Hook Promise, which is one of the youngest and newest gun safety groups to come on the scene in the course of the gun debate. So we're going to first hear from the leaders who've done it, and then we're going to talk about how these concepts can be applied to these emerging movements that are trying to get a toehold. So Robin, tell us more about how you change hearts, some of the science that's behind it, and why is it called Truth?
Well, we're called Truth because we have always been dedicated to the notion that when we can empower young people with the facts, they will make the right decisions. And so the bedrock of the Truth campaign has always been about bringing facts to the forefront that are news. Now, when Truth first started, the facts about the tobacco industry, that they'd lied, everybody, some of you may be too young to remember, but I hope most of you do, that picture of all of the CEOs of the big tobacco industries with their hands raised, sitting before Congress, testifying that nicotine is not addictive. They lied. And those lies were exposed through the Master Settlement Agreement, through the discovery of reams and reams of documents. There actually is a Truth Initiative library at UCSF that houses all those documents. You can research them, but they lied for years. And so Truth was really dedicated to exposing that. And I am proud to say, has made incredible progress. I always like to start with the success, but to your point, when I say that 15% of Americans smoke now when almost 50% smoked before, when the Surgeon General's report first came out in '64, or 5.4% of kids smoke today when 23% smoked before. That's a national average. That can be very, very deceiving. So yes, if you're in DC, and by the way, Georgetown is not a tobacco-free campus, so anybody want to talk to me about that later, we should talk. But if you're in DC, or if you're in California or New York or places like that, you don't see a lot of people smoking. But if you're in Mississippi or Oklahoma, it's a very different story. Or if you're a person with a mental health disability or LGBTQ, it's a very different story. So we haven't won completely yet. But I very much love the way you phrase this in terms of hearts and policy. So there are real policy tools we use. It's not just about cat videos. I think of it as like the 4 A's: affordability, access, appeal, and then shifting attitudes and awareness. So affordability is very big for us. If you make the most important thing you can do, most powerful thing you can do is make cigarettes really expensive, because young people don't have a lot of money. So when you raise the taxes on cigarettes, you have the most immediate impact on smoking rates. Appeal, right? When you can, one of the ways that young people start smoking is by flavors, right? Menthol is how over half of young people start smoking, or little cigars that come in cherry flavor and grape flavor and pina colada flavor, or e-cigarettes now that my personal favorite is unicorn vomit. Clearly that's targeted to 35-year-olds, right? So reducing access to flavors is a big part of what we do. Access in ways of, we have a big effort aimed at reducing tobacco on campuses, right? When it's not around you, it's much harder to smoke. One of the most effective tools have been all the clean air policies that have made it harder to smoke when you're at work, when you're at school, when you're in a restaurant. All of those things make a big difference. Right now, there's a big movement toward Tobacco 21, right? If you can keep a young person from smoking until they're over the age of 19, if you make it harder for them to get cigarettes or to get an older friend to buy cigarettes for you. If you're 16, you might have a friend who's 18, but you probably don't have a friend who's 21. It makes a big difference. Talking about working at the state level, 5 states now have Tobacco 21 laws: Hawaii, California, Maine, New Jersey, and Oregon. 19 states have at least taken a step and have local laws for Tobacco 21, so that's a big part of what we want to do. But the last thing, is really about hearts, because none of that can happen unless you have public will. unless the people want that. And that's what the Truth Campaign is about. I mean, we've always thought about it as we have to create a brand, the Truth brand, that is as aspirational, appealing, a badge young people want to wear, as popular as Marlboro, as Camel, as Newport. And by the way, yes, we've had great success in making them seem less socially acceptable, but it's over $9 billion being spent every year against those brands. So it is powerful. It may not seem powerful sitting here in Washington, D.C., but in Oklahoma, it is. And the way we do it is we think, now we live in the digital age, right? Is how do we use digital tools to move people through an engagement ladder? So when you see something that talks about dogs and cats are twice as likely to get cancer if their owner smokes, and we do it in an incredibly engaging way, or other ways that will engage young people with things that matter to them right now. Health consequences don't matter as much. Maybe they matter for pets, but not for people. But what matters to young people? Relationships, right? So we knew that you are 50% more likely to get left swiped on Tinder or any other dating app if you post a picture of yourself smoking. So we did a music video called Left Swiped At, which was all about what happens to you when you're smoking on a social dating app, because we know that, young people don't care that smoking can kill you, but they do care about something that's deadly to their love life. And so what we're trying to do is move people through that engagement ladder. Maybe you see the Catmageddon spot, or left swipe as we call it, and all you're going to do is raise your hand. That's okay. Become one of our 2.3 million fans or followers, and we'll stay in touch with you. We'll keep giving you little things to do. Participate in a quiz, share something, put your own spin on something. But maybe then we can move you not to the millions, but to the hundreds of thousands who are willing to participate in an effort we did. Here's one with the folks from Do Something, which is an organization that creates social engagement, digital engagement among young people. So we did something called GTFO, not what you think. It was Get the Filters Out, which was all about how cigarette butts are the most littered item on the planet. Maybe we can move you up another level, and we can get 1,000 of you, in fact 5,000 of you, to sign a petition to get tobacco out of Walgreens. CVS, great leader in taking tobacco out of their stores. Walgreens still hasn't. Or maybe, if we can get you all the way up the ladder, we can get 100 of you to actually go to the Walgreens shareholders meeting and protest outside, or put on zombie makeup. We recently had a zombie march outside of Walgreens in Washington, D.C. to prove that point. So that's a little bit about how we're doing it.
Thank you, Robin. All right, now we're going to hear from Evan, and let's talk about how you found your love.
Well, what I think you mean is how we won the freedom to marry by this element of persuasion that proved effective in helping build the public support that we said was needed. And I will tell that story quickly, but I'm going to make 3 points today. First is that while it is important to win hearts and minds, and it was a central element of our strategy, and messaging is an essential element of winning hearts and minds, all of that, in a sense, is a tactic that has to serve strategy. So before you get to this question of to what degree and how do you change hearts and minds, which for us was very important, you actually first have to understand and be clear about what is the strategy, the pathway to achieving your goal. I mentioned earlier that when I wrote my paper in 1983, I was writing about cases. Well, in fact, gay couples had sought the freedom to marry in a wave of litigation in the immediate aftermath of the Stonewall Revolution, which we usually use as the benchmark for the beginning of the modern LGBT movement. All of those cases lost. One of those cases had even reached the Supreme Court and had lost. So the question we faced was, how do we win the freedom to marry through the engine of the court that had already said no? So for us, an essential element of the strategy The strategy always said it was always a national strategy, not a state strategy, although states were an element of the strategy. How do we achieve the national resolution through the court, which had already said no? Well, we needed to create a climate that would impel the court to do the right thing. And changing hearts and minds, along with winning states, along with tackling federal discrimination, each one of which required its own bundle of tactics and campaigns and work, changing hearts and minds was one major component that we could use to change the climate that would get us the result we wanted. And therefore, that's where changing hearts and minds fit in. That's why it was important for us. The second point I want to make is that while message, while words, while coming up with the right values and themes and way of engaging people is an essential element of changing hearts and minds, as important as message is message delivery. Who is speaking to whom? In what modalities? What vectors? What frequency? How do you build a drumbeat of reinforcing engagement with the right messengers saying the right things at the right time to the right people, the right number of times over the right amount of time? People tend to think about words and message. Everybody always wants to talk about that and argue about that. But building the message delivery, some of which is actually about communications and digital engagement and messengers and so on, and some of it is about engineering actions. Winning states created a dynamic that helped us win in the court of public opinion, which then helped us win in the courts of law. And there was synergy amongst all of these things. It's not only about communications either. Now to your question. One of the things we identified was that when we won that first ruling in favor of the freedom to marry back in 1996, first ever time in the world that we had gotten a court to say yes after all those courts had said no, that was in Hawaii in 1996, we were at 27% support. By 2010, through many, many battles and many defeats and some victories, including the victory in Massachusetts that my colleague Mark Solomon helped lead, we had engaged this conversation across America and had grown public support from 27% to a majority. We had, in relatively short time, from 1996 to 2010, we had nearly doubled the number of Americans who supported the freedom to marry, a very rapid historic rate of change, though it didn't feel so day to day. But what we found was that support was still soft, and it wasn't enough to prevail at the ballot box. It wasn't enough to deliver us what we needed. So we really crunched down hard, particularly in the wake of some very painful defeats, such as the Prop 8 campaign taking away the freedom to marry in California, or a similar ballot measure in Maine the next year. We really crunched down and looked at something like 84 data sets and 5 years of experience in multiple campaigns to figure out what did we need to change in order to reach the next swath of Americans, the next 5 to 15%, to solidify that fragile majority into a solid, secure, and palpable majority. And among the experiences and data sets and all that we were analyzing in order to figure this out, and this is what you're asking for, we conducted some focus groups and we talked to people. And what we did in these focus groups was take out the people who were already with us, and we also took out the hardcore opponents, the people who would never be with us. What we were looking at was the reachable but not yet reached. What was it that we were not yet doing effectively enough to get them? And we asked a very simple set of questions. We asked first the question, why did you want to get married? And the number one question people gave, these non-gay people, these uncertain, not haters, but not yet with us people gave, the number one answer they gave to why did you want to get married was love. Love, number one answer. Next question we asked them is, why do you think gay people want to get married? And the number one answer was, I don't know. The number one answer was, I don't know, followed by the kinds of things you just started saying, maybe health benefits or taxes or something. And the problem was that answer for people was something these people believe gay people should have. They should have health coverage. They should be treated with respect. But that's not marriage. They don't need marriage for that. So this was the light bulb moment, that for these people, the people we hadn't yet gotten, we'd already gone from 27% to 50-ish%, but the next set of people we needed hadn't yet heard clearly enough that the reason gay people want the freedom to marry is the same reason they want the freedom to marry. Because we fall in love, we dream of love, we want to make a commitment to another person, we want to be held accountable for that commitment, we want to be supported and celebrated in that love and commitment to build family, et cetera, the heart, all this stuff. Well, once we realized that the case we were making that had so effectively grown to a majority from 27% to 50-ish% wasn't the case that the next group of people needed to hear. It had worked. It wasn't that what we were doing wasn't working. It's that we needed to adapt what we were doing to the people we now needed to reach. And so we elevated the themes of love and commitment and the personal stories of the families and real people and the non-gay family members talking about their gay family members, because that's what those people needed to hear. And as we did that, we grew from 2010 to, by the time we stood in front of the Supreme Court, 50% in 2010, 51% actually, to in 2010, by the time we stood in front of the Supreme Court, hoping for the final victory that we then did win, in 2015 we were at 63%, a huge shift. Now, was all of that due to the themes of love and commitment? No. We were also winning more states. We were also bringing in business voices and clergy and surprising messengers and Republicans and conservatives and young people and older people, et cetera. We were doing all kinds of programs and all kinds of work on the ground as well as in the air. But the shifting of the emphasis and the tools we used to make sure that it wasn't just Evan Wolfson saying love and commitment, but that the media was beginning to say it. Politicians began to say it. President Obama said it when he came out in support of the freedom to marry, talking in this vocabulary that the people we needed to reach needed to hear. And by that use of persuasion, deliberate, but also pervasive, and focused not on what felt good to us, what did I think was the right answer, what moved me, but rather what would move the next set of people we needed to move. That's how we were able to build our majority into the palpable, clear majority, so that by the time we stood in front of the Supreme Court, our theme was, it's time, all of America is ready, you can do this. And not only were we saying that, people who didn't even support the freedom to marry, people like Orrin Hatch were saying, well, everybody can see where this is going, let's get it over with. Well, that's what we wanted. We didn't have to persuade everybody. We had to make sure we had enough, and we had to remind enough other people that they could live with it. And that's how we were successful in marshaling the persuasion and the public education necessary to win in the court of public opinion and thereby win in the court of law.
Great. At lunch, we're going to talk more, and we're going to hear from Mark Solomon, your colleague, about how you deliberately tapped into business as one of the levers to drive that change.
Right.
Okay, so we've heard from two of the veteran leaders who've tipped their movements. Now we're going to move into emerging movements. And Erica, let's talk about, I think the challenge for the movement for Black Lives today is so difficult because, it is illegal to discriminate. There are laws and policies protecting the rights. And yet, hearts and minds are still not where they need to be. So tell us about how you think about both your policy and your efforts to change public opinion and move the cause forward.
Yeah, I want to be clear that there are many of us within the movement have different lanes. Mm-hmm. And for my lane in particular, I support the emotional and spiritual well-being of Black people that have been impacted by racism, that have internalized oppression. And so I do that through healing spaces and cultivating healing villages and creating, talking about different ways that our community can respond to mental illness other than calling the police. And so I don't deal too much on the policy end, but I support people who are frustrated that the folks that are going out and focused on changing hearts of non-Black people, and some Black folks too that still have not been able to really accept and receive that this is something that's happening to us. My initial thought was it's very difficult to change hearts and minds when you are labeled a terrorist, when you are labeled a domestic terrorist group. And so that is very different than the folks here on the panel. And also knowing that this is a country founded on white supremacy, when you have Black people that are affirming that our lives matter and have been and continuing to shout to the world that this is what is happening to us. And there's a level of the removal of cognitive dissonance, right? That even then when we lay out facts, that there is always something else, that our facts don't matter, the things that are happening to us. There is another way, in particular thinking about police brutality and state-sanctioned violence and mass incarceration, that, well, you had to do something to do that, to get that result. That maybe that person, thinking about victimizing the folks who, and demonizing the folks who are being murdered by police or who are in jail unjustly. So we are fighting that on multiple fronts. And I think some of us have been able to do that better than others, depending on what your proximity to whiteness, ultimately. Those of us who might be more palatable, that may have grown up in predominantly white areas, those of us that have not, that there's a level, and I feel like some of you all may understand, that there are some Black people that are more palatable, that you can hear it from another person when they're using language that you are accustomed to, and saying the same thing that another person is saying, and there's a block. So those of us that have that experience and have that level of understanding might have a little more patience in that. But those of us who are living in communities where police have occupied our communities, that are literally parked out in front of our houses or on corners, and in DC with jump outs. I'm not sure if you all are aware of that the police literally jump out of unmarked cars, don't have their badges, don't have uniforms, and terrorize Black people, Black children on the way to school, coming back home. And so when I'm thinking about changing hearts and minds, thinking about people that have come out and supported the movement and joined the movement, oftentimes it is Black folks and people of color that we can affirm for them that you are seeing what you think you're seeing. You are not crazy. These are the ways in which it's impacted you, and now we can give you language to name it. So a lot of that is through political education. A lot of it is through our healing spaces. And historically, the ways that we've been able to build momentum is by actually creating those spaces in the community to affirm, again, that you are seeing what you think you're seeing, and there is a level of power, and this is the way that we can do that. So in particular, like with the NEAR Act, the Neighborhood Engagement Achieve Results Act, that Mayor Bowser is really putting herself in the forefront when she was vehemently opposed to this. And now it's hers all of a sudden. When we've had to protest her to shift, we've had to disrupt a lot for her to shift. We had to disrupt a lot on city council and do a lot of lobbying and training people on how to testify, all these different things without funding. We don't have any, from looking at Black Lives Matter DC, and other grassroots organizations, you might have people that are connected to, how can I explain this? So the majority of the Black Lives Matter chapters that you might see were not commissioned to be created. These were just regular people that said, Black Lives Matter. And it was an affirmation that we used, and that was what we decided to call ourselves. There is no, we can say like official chapters, but there is no real funding that comes to any of the chapters. And in particularly, it is also hard to get funding when you're labeled a domestic terrorist group. And that often only happens to Black people, and there's a reason why, that many of our organizations are underfunded. Even looking on college campuses, a lot of the either subject areas, those that particularly impact Black people, are systemically underfunded. And there's a reason for that, and we have to be honest about that. So it's gonna look really different for us. It's not gonna, I'm looking at these and trying to think about how I can bring this back and kind of share some of these things, but some of the holes I see, we're not talking about how systemic racism impacts how we can change hearts and minds, and that there is vehement opposition, that I cannot give up this idea or belief about Black people because it's going to shake the foundation of which my whole identity stands. And so that is something that I don't think that we are really focused on, honestly. I don't know if it serves us too. That it's better for us to build within our community and build power, and then look at strategic targets on how we can affect change. And even if it doesn't happen on a systemic level, that we are creating the systems within ourselves to achieve the liberation that we want beyond anyone giving it to us. Because I don't believe that that's gonna happen. We're gonna have to take it, and we have to create our own.
Well, I think some of your comments around, I think it's common across every movement, those bridging, the folks that can talk to a wider, more mainstream office and not get targeted that way. I think that echoes what Evan was saying when you started trying to reach out to non-gay people. And I think one of the interesting quotes in the book, because we had a chance to study that movement, was, you started running ads and doing campaigns where you had the straight uncle talking about what it felt like to have, his nephew come out. And there was pushback from the LGBT community. Why aren't this is about us. Why aren't you featuring gay couples and talking about us? And your goal was to change the minds of straight people, not people who were already gay or sympathetic to the cause. And every movement, National Council La Raza and its work in my first book, Forces for Good, were masters at this, finding folks to share their message that mainstream America could listen to and not immediately reject. So they didn't have the president of National Council La Raza on the stage. They had their token white person. The point was, to Evan's point, I think, you gotta win, you have your ultimate goal, and you use whatever tactics to get to that end goal. All right, let's go to Millie. How do you guys think about changing hearts and minds? I think the issue around Me Too and women in the workplace, gender equity, is another one of these things where in most companies and most places, it's illegal to harass. It's illegal to commit acts of sexual violence. It's illegal to discriminate against women. And yet, obviously, we're treated every day to the news that it's happening. How do you think about not just changing policy, but changing hearts and changing social norms around this?
Yeah, well, my thing fell, so I hope you can hear me. Yeah, okay, good. It's not my thing, okay, but it's whatever it's called. Thank you. It's very, like you were saying, it's about understanding that there are certain things that you have to do within your own community, that it'll take a longer challenge. There's many obstacles to changing hearts or thinking that you're changing hearts, mainly because we, as I shared earlier, we do come from, as part of the society, we know how our communities, Latino communities, we inherited not being part of the Fair Labor Standards Act as that part of the industry. Farm workers, agricultural workers are not part of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it's very clear there. Agricultural workers are not. So being invisible, and our communities are more in its majority, and I'm talking about farm workers. Because we're invisible, you have very little idea of everything that goes on. So if I share with you that we found out since 1988 that 9 out of 10 women are sexually harassed in the workplace once in their lifetime, it's still happening in 2018. And it's gotten worse because there is rape happening much more often. And I can say it's because we're very isolated, we're very away from everything. The ill sentiment against immigrants, and that includes Latinos, that includes farmers, that makes it harder for women to say anything because we're threatened that we are going to be deported, that our children or our family, if we have any here, are going to be hurt, and many other things. You know, you're going to lose your job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, when we started organizing, as I said, I shared earlier, it was more about getting to talk about issues that were much easier to talk about, because in California we were more acquainted with worker rights, the pesticide issues, which were still happening, are still happening at this point in level. But then having to talk about women being abused or hurt or battered at home. So that became kind of like, but working within the cultural context of how we live, where we started understanding that men are, in our communities, men are the head of the household. But when we started understanding and acquainting that women are the center of the family, and when we learned that the more we acquired information and started sharing and then wanting to support each other and working together, that was another episode where we felt that it was important that whatever was happening at home is something that we could support each other. But then when we got to the point of harassment, rape, oh, you don't talk about that. That's a taboo. And then there's a lot of myths in terms of, and there still are, in terms of you are to be blamed. If it happened to me, someone that was an organizer and knew about labor laws, if it happened to me that I was silenced, and it happened for 15 or more years. So imagine, and I worked right next to my brothers, and I worked right next to my dad, and then I worked right next to my husband at that time. I was sexually harassed. I was lucky I was not raped. And all these things, not being able to talk because you would be blamed, all these things, no one will believe you, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very, very hard. So when we did that open letter, it was talking about our reality. And we knew that, and by then we had already worked with women for more than 20 years about opening that dialogue. We used theater. We used the Banana Project, the campaign. We used several other methods that would open the dialogue where women didn't have to, at the beginning, talk about their own experiences. But in the theater, the skit, you would talk about what happened there, and then had people interested in learning about all these things that we were saying, and maybe there was support, and maybe there were other women. If you were being harmed, then other women were being harmed. I found out 20 years later that there were more, because there were more women in that workplace, they were also being harassed. And then one was being raped. I did not know that. If I would have known, it's very different at times, the way you are raised, in terms of don't talk about people are not going to believe you, et cetera, then believing someone else and then fighting for that and then joining. That's what ended up happening with us. And it was very, very interesting. By the time we wrote that letter and we heard about all the work that Tarana Burke was doing with the Me Too movement and all that, and we had already been working with some agencies. There's a famous case in our community, but there's been many, many, many other cases of women being raped in the fields. Olivia Tamayo, EEOC, helped with that. But before we got to EEOC and accompany Olivia, we spent several months to have her feel in a space of trust with not only us, but then with an agency, because she had been raped for 6 years by the general supervisor, by someone who everybody felt that they were, that everybody was afraid of. And by the time she went with us to speak with someone that she also felt comfortable with, then having to talk to her husband and having to talk to her children that all this was happening for 6 years, it's something, that when we wrote that letter, the letter is saying, we understand, we know that you are going through so much and that maybe many people will not believe by many other reasons, but we're there, we believe you, we stand by you, and we'll be there for you. So for us, of course, it opened many, many more doors because of the kind of industry we were connecting with. And that really helped us understand that the movements that we were doing with Domestic Workers Alliance also, not just farm workers, with janitors, all this that we were doing, needed to connect. We needed to connect with all sorts of industries. And that is what's making a big difference at this point in time.
Great, thank you. And we're going to hear from Nicole and from the gun safety point of view, and then we're going to open it up for a few questions before we move into the breakout discussion. So I know all of you probably have a lot of questions and comments. We're not going to have time on this panel to go into all of them, but you will have a good 30 to 40 minutes in the breakouts if you want to come to the breakout with any of these speakers, and we have facilitators that I'll introduce at the end. So if you don't get your question in at this big forum, certainly come to one of the breakouts. Nicole.
Hi. Hearts and policy. That pretty much sums up a lot of the gun violence prevention movement. After Sandy Hook happened, not having a clue about what gun violence was at that point, I'd been living in England for 18 years, where guns are not an issue, and I'd been living back in the US for less than 2 years before my son was murdered. So that was a harsh introduction, and I remember the day of Dylan's funeral. That was the day that Wayne LaPierre came out and said the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And a journalist asked, what do you think about that? And I said, I don't even know who Wayne LaPierre is. That's how little I knew about the gun issue in the United States at that point. A lot of advisors came at us when we first started Sandy Hook Promise, and everyone said, you need to focus on policy. I'm a marketer by trade, so I'm always thinking about what problem are you trying to solve? Is this the right way to go? And I thought, these are the experts. They're saying go for policy. They're saying the low-hanging fruit is background checks. Go there while learning about everything else. I probably didn't trust enough of my guts back then to say, well, if policy has been the focus for the last couple of decades and you haven't had a lot of success, why do you think this time it's going to be different? Why should we just beat our head against the same wall and potentially not bear any fruit? And let's face it, one policy is not going to solve the issue of gun violence in America. Background checks failed. I remember being in the Rose Garden with an incredibly angry President Obama, And that was a really dark day for a lot of us. And then afterwards, the day after, it was like, okay, we're doing something wrong here. For this not to have passed, we are doing something fundamentally wrong. We need to step back and look at this from an entirely different perspective and solve this problem in a different way. And we started studying social change. And the reason I was nodding so many times when Evan was speaking is we studied case studies, everything from marriage equality back to civil rights, and said, how did our country find common ground and move forward on things that were so divisive, issues that were so extreme in their opinions, like the gun violence issue, or gun control as it was called then. And we thought, okay, the reason is there's all these levers to social change. And the gun violence movement had only been focusing on one up to that point, policy. Then in 2014, they started focusing a little bit on politics, electing the right leaders. Brady campaign did some great work on one of the third levers, legal action, but because of the PLACA ruling, there's so many barriers, and gun manufacturers are immune to that. So there's very limited action you can do on the legal side. But what about grassroots? What about education? What about behavioral change and programs? You look at Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There is no policy called designated driver. It's a behavioral change that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Creating tobacco to be uncool. Recycling, something that the kids brought home to their parents. And marriage equality, for sure. Love is love. Changing the narrative, changing the conversation, and bringing it to your community. You look at Habitat for Humanity. They don't build a lot of houses. What they give you is an experience in your own community that you get engaged with. The gun violence prevention movement wasn't doing that. It was basically saying, call your senator, call your congressman. That's a horrible way to engage people. It really doesn't work, because how are you personally involved in this? How are you personally invested in a phone call or an email? That's not the way to change hearts. And until the pulse of the nation changes, until those hearts change, you are not going to see the policy change. Plain and simple. So we decided, you know what? And Erica talked about lanes in the highway. We got a lot of flack from a lot of people when we said, you know what? We are not going to focus just on policy. We're going to be that group that teaches people how to prevent violence in their own communities and in their own schools. And we're going to do so in a narrative that no one can argue with. Because it's about protecting children. It's about teaching people to know the signs to prevent violence before it starts. No one is pro-gun violence. No one is pro-children being killed in their classrooms, or any other suicide or mass shooting or homicide that takes place. But by empowering people to take action in their own communities, you are engaging people personally in this issue to enable change. And that's how you're building your influential majority. That's how you're reaching the unreachable, by giving this new narrative. Evan is one of the few PSAs that we've delivered over the time. I'm a marketing person. I set a really lofty goal of having 1 to 2 million views. I thought, that'll be amazing. It had 155 million views in about a 6-week period. It changed the narrative by allowing people to say, wow, I don't just need to call a senator or a congressman. I can recognize the signs of someone who's at risk of hurting themselves or someone else, and I can make a difference through these programs, through these free programs that teach our kids and adults how to make a difference. 2 generations. That's how you deliver change. Tobacco, marriage equality. Black Lives Matter, there's a lot of generations going on there. But this is how we're grabbing hearts and then looping people through to give them the action that they can take that is going to create meaningful change where they live, while building a base to then mobilize for policy change. And we don't talk to the extremes. We're not going to change the minds of the far right, and the far left are already on our side. There are fantastic groups doing wonderful work at taking on the NRA. I have no interest in the NRA. The way I look at it, Sandy Hook Promise flanks them, which I think is a smarter strategy. We also don't talk to the far left because there's amazing groups that are mobilizing on that front. We are targeting that mass middle who say this is a hopeless and helpless issue because all I can do is make a phone call. No. That's why I can go into the reddest of red states, sit in front of sheriff's associations, sit in front of gun owners, sit in front of people who start off the conversation sitting like this. Again, who are you to come here and tell me how to prevent violence. You're just here to take my guns. I couldn't give a fiddlestick about your guns. I'm here to teach you how to protect your kids and keep your community safe. And by the end of the conversation, they are leaning in. That's how you affect hearts. That's how you create change. And of course, there is a strategy behind the strategy. And that's how we're going to change this culture around gun rights, gun freedom, or gun control to just focus on safety. The guns aren't going away, 300 million of them. But let's focus on access. Let's focus on helping someone before they ever pick up a weapon to hurt themselves or someone else. Let's focus on the tangible things that we can do. And I know it works. We're in 7,000 schools now. We've trained 3.5 million people. For a 5-year-old organization, that's kind of good. We've stopped multiple school shooting threats and suicide threats. We've gotten 2 bills passed at a federal level as well as many other state levels. Not a lot of other gun violence prevention groups can say that because we focus on nonpartisanship. We focus on working both aisles. I am not a fan necessarily of the current administration, but I've sat in 2 listening sessions and planted seeds because that's what you need to do to create change. And that's what we're going to keep doing. Working together in our lane of the highway, along with all the other gun violence prevention groups and advocates with their lanes of the highway. We're talking to our audience, they're talking to theirs, and that's a movement. A movement is not one person. A movement is not one group. It is lots of people working together towards a common goal, but focusing on their own lane. So that's what we're doing on Hearts and Minds.
Please join me in thanking this amazing panel. Wow, okay, so I think we should take just a couple minutes for large group questions, and we're gonna go straight into breakouts. I'm gonna introduce the facilitators. Does anybody have I see a burning hand. Please stand and share your question or your comment.
So a lot of really valuable wisdom and lessons here. One of the things I didn't hear, which is it's kind of implicit actually in a lot of what you said, but it's a big deal in both the literature and my own experience, is the importance of relationships and structures that build relationships, right? So when people say why Parkland is being successful, I say, because they're all students in the same school. They know each other, they go back to school together, and that gives them power, right? Or chapter-based structures are smaller, so people know each other, and they have reasons to show up besides just, we're here for an issue, we're here for each other. And I think, like I said, I think it's implicit in a lot of what was said, but I'm interested in how you all see or use that in your organizing.
Yeah, it's a great question, and she's talking about, Malcolm Gladwell has a great piece in The Yorker called Small Change. And it's all about, social media allows weak tie networks to form. I can donate to your cause or come to your event. But it's strong tie networks that kept the students who organized the beginnings of the civil rights movement, for instance, to stay at that lunch counter in the face of threats, physical, emotional, and verbal. So how do you guys build strong ties and build community within your movements? Anybody want to go first?
I can start.
Erica, yeah.
One of the things that that we have incorporated in DC is Black Lives Matter open houses that we have once a month. But there's multiple ways throughout the week to be able to engage with us. And that was intentional, and also we had to ramp up our security practices because we get death threats daily. And so thinking about that, and it's not unlike our ancestors or those that came before us. And so that was kind of a given. So the other part of that is connecting affinity groups, so folks who are in similar lanes, making sure that they're connected and talking about strategy, but also in the healing spaces, when you are working with people who are experiencing trauma daily, to have a space to be able to talk about it brings people together too. So not just being connected in the work, because that's not how we survive. It's also affirming our humanity to ourselves, So not just being in the business of work, and how capitalism would have us believe that our worth is based on what we can produce. And so being able to have those spaces to connect in those ways is really important.
One of the interesting things that you shared when we were preparing for this panel is a lot of your work, Erica, is with victims and survivors.
Yeah.
And that's not just the actual victim of gun violence. It's every kid in a neighborhood who lost a kid to a gun, right?
Yeah.
So, and every movement that we studied, the core was connecting victims, survivors, family members, and broadening that definition to everyone who's impacted by the violence. Evan, you wanted to respond to the question.
I would say there are several different slices at this. Very quickly, I would say when I'm explaining to people what were the elements of our success, I have a few taxonomies of four things we needed. One of those is to say that in order to win the freedom to marry, to get from that no to a yes over more than 4 decades, we needed the Constitution, we needed a movement, we needed a strategy, and we needed a campaign. We needed all of these things. The campaign drove the strategy and leveraged the movement. Without that kind of focus and deliberateness and keeping eyes on the prize, at not just what this one's doing, that one's doing, and the other, but what was being done collectively and where were the gaps and how do we fill them in order to fulfill what the strategy required, even by people who didn't even know there was a strategy. We could give them things to do, we could engage them and so on, and we could generate action that would then result in organically people taking action and so on. That's a movement. Within a movement, you will see clusters of relationships. You will see critical masses coming together. You will see people moved by their own experience who may not know anything about the history or the law or the politics. But as long as they're doing those pieces and as long as you're helping foster that, giving people the air cover of discussion that will inspire them to bring it to where they are in their community, in their voice, in their circle of friends, or in their comfort level with the kinds of actions they can take, which hopefully you are making easier and easier for people to do. You generate through, as you said, relationships, but also through connection to this strategy, the multiple kinds of engagement you need for people to do it. So that's one way that happens, but it doesn't just happen spontaneously. It happens in parts through organic engagement and generating momentum, but also you have to foster it and drive it and make it happen and facilitate it and provide tools to it. And so I guess that would be one point I would make. A second point I would make is that Leslie told the story of one of the many flashpoints in our long history of struggle where a bunch of us gathered into a room to re-articulate the strategy and resummon a critical mass of our movement to the work that was needed to build the kind of campaign and do this kind of work I needed at a very low point. In 2005, right after the 2004 election, when we lost 13 ballot measures, when we were blamed unfairly for getting Bush elected, et cetera, all of which turned out not to be true, but nevertheless, there was a lot of angst and drama within the LGBT movement, not to mention from pundits saying marriage is too big, it's too hard, it's too remote, you should go down, you should not look for this, you should play. And even within the movement, a critical mass of us came together and were able to resummon a critical mass of movement players. There was never a point at which the entire LGBT movement decided that we were going to work on marriage or that we were going to make it a priority or that we were going to recommit in the face of defeat. You don't need you need enough. But part of what enabled us to get that enough was there was a group of us who had worked together, fought together, wrangled together, competed together, and laughed together over years. And there was a degree of trust and a degree of ability to get a critical mass of people to then bring in the critical mass of funders and stakeholders and others to build what was needed and to take it to another level. And so relationships do play a part in that, even within the internal part of a movement as well. It's not the whole movement, but it can help bring together the needed campaign that is another component alongside a movement to make the success happen.
All right, so we're really at the end of our time, but you have more time with these leaders in the breakouts. I also will refer you to chapter 1 in the books. You all have a complimentary copy of the book on your tables. Turn Grassroots Gold. It's all about how you create those relationships and those strong ties. So delve into that if you want to get into the meat of it. I had asked each panelist to think of one piece of advice to share with you to lead the movements in the next phase. They're going to share it at the breakouts because we don't have time right now. Now I would like to ask all the facilitators who are going to facilitate the breakout discussions to stand so that we can recognize you before we thank the panel. So we're going to move into the topics on the panel here. At each table, I want you to go to the table where you see somebody holding one of the placards. So if you want to talk about LGBT equality going forward, Chico, one of our GSEI team members in the back, wave your hand, Chico. Thank you, is going to lead that discussion. Jenny, you want to hold up this card? Jenny Yang, the former chair of the EEOC Commission, now a Soros Fellow, is going to work with Millie to facilitate a conversation around the next phase of gender justice. Where's our other facilitators? Dave and Vincent, two youth activists, are going to lead the youth smoking and tobacco conversation. Who else do we have in the house? Diane and Erica are going to do a racial justice. And where's Jennifer? Hey, Jennifer. So Jennifer from Everytown for Gun Safety is here. She's going to facilitate with also, well, Nicole has to scoot out to another meeting, but Donna Dees and some others are going to facilitate the gun safety discussion. So go to Jennifer. And then last but not least, we've got Chris, who's going to have a conversation about money and movements, philanthropy. He's a member of the GSEI team, one of our senior advisors. So go find Chris. And before you do that, the wild card, Liddy and Bill Novelli and Liddy Manson, the head of our Aging Well Hub here at GSEI. You want to talk about aging in place? If you want to talk about any other issue that we haven't already covered, please do so. And I think Jeremy also wanted to have a climate action table. Is Jeremy in the house? If you want to talk about climate, environmental defense funds, Jeremy Simons is here. So before you break, please join me once again in thanking this incredible panel. Thank you so much.